Okay, so I guess we can start now. We don't have many audience right
Okay.
now, but they may join later. So anyway, we'll be recording this conversation and we'll be uploading that later. So they may access it anytime they want.
Okay.
So first of all, sir, welcome to our small, rather tiny house, Spout, and thank you for collaborating with us. It was our privilege, complete privilege, to have access to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to work with Team Spout, and I'm really happy that I got this opportunity to translate the work of Nimi Nankichi for you. This is the first time, in fact, I've translated something into English. Usually, till now, I've been translating into Marathi from Japanese, and again, children's literature is something which I haven't really translated much. Maybe two or three before this book project. I had translated some two or three stories by another author, Kenji Miyazawa, but that's about it. So I think it's the first time, like I've translated, uh, a book of Japanese children's literature. So yeah, I'm very happy.
Thank you very much. Actually, sir, children's literature itself is a rather new concept because,
Yes.
yes, so I think uh, it is Japanese literature. I don't know about Japanese literature much, but Japanese children literature, as far my idea goes, it is a little bit different from how Western society sees literature, rather
Uh,
children's
yes.
literature.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there are basic fundamental differences in Western society and Japanese society, or you can say Western culture and Japanese culture, where Western culture is more individualistic, and there is a very clear cut distinction between humans and nature or elements of nature. On the other hand, Japanese have always believed living in harmony with nature. Their native religion, Shinto, which is translated like Shinto means way of the gods, and which is a form of actually a form of nature worship, or you can say shamanism. And the Japanese believe that everything in nature is sacred. So, like a tree can be can be sacred, a rock can be sacred, a particular river or a particular mountain can be sacred, and every place has its own deity. In Japanese it's called kami. So every place has its own kami. So Japanese have always believed in living in harmony with nature, and that is also reflected, I think, in their literature or even their children's literature. So for example, like in Western children's literature stories, you often find that um, like the hero goes out somewhere and then he fights demons or dragons, and and then rescues some princess from a castle. So if you see Japanese children's stories, they are more of where people, like the protagonist goes out into the jungle or in the nature, and he discovers something, or he interacts with the animals, or maybe some supernatural beings. And not necessarily, it's not necessarily that those supernatural beings are evil, or there is not always a conflict or fight between them. That's one important difference. Then secondly, I think most of the children's stories in West, most of them, maybe not all, they have a happy ending. That is not the case in case of many Japanese children's stories. Some many Japanese children's stories have a rather sad ending. Even some of the stories of Nankichi Nimi, which I have translated for this book, and which will some of them will come in the next part,
Yes, yes, yes.
like Gon the
Like the fox,
Fox.
yes,
So if you see that story, it has a very sad ending.
yes.
So I think that is the difference in Western children's literature and Japanese children's literature.
I think somewhere I read that Gonda Fox is the parallel comparison of Nankichi Nimi's own life.
Yes, yes. Because he, first of all, he had a very short life. Um, he lived for hardly 30 years, and because of his failing health, he had a lot of problems. He had to leave jobs, and overall, his life was not very happy. So yes, you can say that, and yeah, so he felt lonely. So if you see the story Gon the fox is also feeling very lonely, and that's why he comes out and goes to the villages. And of course, initially he's the mischief maker, but later on he decides to help the hunter Hyoju. And but in the end, because of the misunderstanding, he gets shot. So yes, you can say, yeah, it's a kind of a reflection on Nimi Nankichi's life.
Okay. Yeah, I also find that in Japanese culture, they do not really focus on giving children a separate identity from the perspective of a grown up adult. It's kind of blurred realism where the
Yeah.
fantasies are included in the story, but still there is a certain realistic aspect which makes it very different from Western style of fantasizing reality. It is rather uh, bringing reality into fantasy, not the opposite. That you are more focused on imagination. It is Japanese children's stories are more focused on realism, even when there is animism or there is impersonation. In any way, these I feel stories are
Yes.
more realistic.
Yes.
I have one
Yeah.
question from the
Yes.
audience.
Yeah.
Can I say it now?
Yeah. Please.
Kaushik Das has asked whether this
Yeah.
sad ending is because of traditional hectic lives of the Japanese people.
No. It's not from the traditional hectic life of the Japanese people, and uh, if you say hectic life of the Japanese people, that has happened only since post world, post World War, like after 1945, when they started, when they had to rise from the destruction, and then they went for economic development. So later on, of course, their life became hectic, but traditionally, Japanese life was not very hectic, I would say, because traditionally Japan was always agricultural nation, and so basically it was farming communities who stayed and worked together. The sad ending, it's I think it's a very Japanese cultural thing. If you see anything related to Japanese culture, their aesthetics, their music, traditional music, or of course traditional Japanese literature, you will always find a tinge of sadness in everything. Uh, like there is a Japanese concept called monono aware, which means um, something like, it's very difficult to translate it into English, but like a sadness of things. So for example, the cherry blossoms, which are like a symbol of Japan, and these cherry blossoms bloom for just 1 or 2 weeks, and then they fall off. So uh, that aestheticism, has become a very major part of Japanese culture. That nothing lasts forever, and life is, very fragile, and even the beautiful cherry blossoms, they are going to drop off after 2 weeks, 1 or 2 weeks. So yeah, I would say that sadness, it's a part of Japanese culture actually.
We can find the same in several popular haikus as well.
Yes, yes.
So, we had very good questions from one of our colleagues. I will request Shoham if Shumon has posted these questions on the page. Did he? By now?
No, but I have another question from Apurv Ter- Terakdar. Uh,
Okay.
how hard is it to translate anything from a different culture to make it feel more approachable for others? Or is it left as it to keep the essence untouched?
Sorry, the last part of the question. Is it
Uh,
left? But can you please repeat
or,
that?
yeah, yeah, sure. How hard is it to translate anything from a different culture to make it feel more approachable for others?
Yes.
Or is it left as
Is it left?
is?
Is it
Yes,
left as it is?
as it is. It should be as it is to keep the essence untouched.
Oh, that's a difficult question. Yeah, the short answer to the first part is yes, it is very hard to translate, literature from one culture to another culture. So it's not just from Japanese to English or whatever. It can be even between two Indian languages. I mean, even if you translate anything from Bengali into some other Indian languages, you will find a lot of cultural hurdles. So yes, definitely, that is the challenging part of literary translation, that how you translate culture, because you are not just translating the from the language, you are not translating just the words and the sentences, you also have to translate culture. And many times, the target language may not have those cultural concepts from the source language. For example, I'll give you let's put aside Japanese language. I'll give you a very simple example. Uh, like in Hindi, there is this word for married woman, suhagan. Okay. Now, if somebody wants to translate that word into English, how do you translate it? I mean, there is no, you cannot translate that into English. I mean, if you just say married woman, so
That is
that doesn't carry that essence of suhagan. So it's like that. So yes, it is definitely very hard to translate from one culture to literature from one culture to another. Now the second part, whether it is better left as it is, that is, you know, the translator has to decide case by case, because if you just leave out everything as it is, then the translation would be totally, incomprehensible to the readers in the target language. So you have to think of ways of how you are going to convey, the culture of the target language. Uh, sorry, is the source language into the target language. So sometimes you can give cultural notes, like you can leave, like if there is a cultural word, you can just leave that word as it is in the translation, and in the end you can give a cultural note that this is the meaning and significance of this word or this term. Or if you find something, if there is something nearly equivalent in the target language, then maybe uh, you can go for that. Usually what I do is I do the what I said just now, that I leave the cultural words as it is, and then I give the explanations in the end. You will find it also in the book. So I guess, yeah, that is how at least I approach it.
thank you, sir. I will again thank you, sir. I will again request Shoham. Shoham, if you have access to Slack and if Shuman hasn't posted those questions by now, then could you please come and give me your Slack, thus I can read those questions out. Give me your phone, and I can access your Slack because my phone is engaged here. Shoham, Shoham. So we got some fantastic questions from one of our colleagues, which I do not know why he has not posted them yet. So
Okay.
first question was, what did you find the most interesting thing while translating these stories? Would love to know about the process you had gone through as a translator during this project. What was the challenge? So basically what he is asking, what was the challenge for translating these stories? Because whenever you are translating a larger project or a deeper project, I am not suddenly saying that children's literatures are the genre is shallow, but is it rather easy to translate children's literature, or is it
No,
equally
not at all. No, not at all. Just because it is children's literature doesn't mean it is easy to translate. Children's literature also can be very, very difficult to translate. And yes, I also faced difficulties in translating, some difficulties in translating Nimi Nankichi stories. Um, his language is not very difficult because maybe they are all children's stories, so there it was not much of a problem. But like I said, the cultural part, his stories, most of these stories, they happen in rural parts of Japan, in countryside, and deals with the life of farmers and fishermen. And so there are a lot of and again this was like rural Japan of almost something like almost 100 years ago. So you find a lot of Japanese cultural words which are not really familiar with, and so I really had to look up their meanings and their significance, and that was one difficulty. Um,
I remember
yeah.
there was a particular word for lantern, and I had to
Yes.
search for
Andon.
the shape of the lantern to get into the
Yes.
actual illustration. Because if I make it round and do it the way we are more familiar with, then it would be wrong in Japanese sense. So yes, it is a
Yes.
little difficult.
Yeah. So I also, when I came across that word, so like initially, okay, the dictionaries gave me the explanation that this was a traditional Japanese lantern, but then I actually had to look up the pictures of Andon, and then only I got the idea that okay, what is that Andon, or even in the story that Gone the Fox, there is a mention of a traditional fishing net.
Yes.
Yeah, so again, that fishing net, I really had to search for pictures of that fishing net and how it is used, and then only I got the idea. Okay, like this is the fishing net. So yes, these were some of the difficulties, I guess.
So will it be easier for people or for children here to imagine those day-to-day utensils or day-to-day stuffs, uh, and then kind of rather wave their imagination when we are reading some culture, reading one translation, or it becomes difficult for readers to get into the actual idea or
Um,
actual sense.
um, no, on one hand, it is fine for the children to imagine and let their imagination run wild.
Yes,
But the thing is, you don't know what they are going to imagine. So,
that is the
so
problem.
yeah. So, for example, that Andon, that lantern. Now, you don't know how a child is going to imagine that lantern. So, if the child imagines it in a very different way, then maybe the child won't be able to follow the story, or so that, so like there can be how should I say,
Discrepancy in
wrong imagination, or misplaced imagination. So that possibility is always there. So I think uh, it's better to explain it as a cultural note, then after reading that cultural note, they can always they are free to imagine whatever they want to.
Yes. We have included those notes in this book. I can assure this to audience.
Yeah.
Uh, and the second question from Shumon was,
Yes.
what were the unique qualities brought by Nankichi Nimi in Japanese children's literature? How was it before him, and what changed thereafter? It is one very important question, I guess, because that was a particular juncture when he was writing.
Yeah. So I'm not really very familiar with the history of Japanese children's literature, but I think Nankichi Nemi, uh, he wrote his children's stories, as I said, based on the life of ordinary people and the villagers, the farmers, the fishermen. So I don't think before him anybody had written those kind of children's stories in Japan, specifically for children. And his stories, they really portray, the people's character, their attitude, their behavior very accurately. And uh, they also portray, like, for example, mm, uh, a sense of guilt. And if somebody is trying to do something wrong, and then the person realizes that, oh, I'm what I'm going to do, or what I did was not good, it was wrong, and then I have to change my behavior. So for example, in the Gon the Fox, that initially he plays mischief, but then he realizes that his behavior is mischievous, and then he tries to help the hunter, the Hyoju. Or if you see the story, I think that will be in the included in the next part, the camellia tree to which
Yes.
cow was tethered. So there again, uh, the protagonist of the story, the farmer who is trying to dig the well for the village, uh, when he goes to the village headman to ask for permission to dig the well. So, and the headman is sick and about to die. So but he still refuses him the permission to dig the well. So then he, on his way back, he thinks that anyway, it's better that he dies, and later on after his death I can dig the well there. But then when he tells that thing to his mother says that, I mean, what have you become? Your heart has become black. And then he realizes that no, I should not be thinking like this. And then he goes again to his house to apologize. So this, this kind of thing you often find in Nimi Nankichi's stories, that characters realizing, what wrong they have done or their wrong behavior, and then they are like transformed, or they are trying to correct their behavior. I think that is something uh, maybe Nimi Nankichi really brought into Japanese children's literature. And I think maybe that even after him, uh, that thing continued.
The moral sanction and delayed gratification,
Yes,
that is
yes, 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 yes.
very, very important. So another question that he asks: what role did the magazine Akitori, the Red Bird,
Kaitori, yes.
Kaitori, play in the development of modern children's literature in Japan? So it was, I think the magazine was very significant in the development of Japanese children's literature, because after that
Yes.
people got very much involved and interested.
Yeah. Because before that, there was children's literature, but there was not like a magazine, or um, a very popular magazine. And most of the, like before this Akai Tori, there were books called Akahon, the red books with a red cover, which carried some children's stories. And the artists, most of the artists, they the illustrations by those artists, they were in traditional Japanese style. But when this Akai Tori started, then many leading Japanese authors contributed children's stories to them, to the magazine. Some of them even translated Western children's stories into Japanese and contributed to the magazine. And by that time, there were painters or artists who had mastered the skills, the Western styles of painting. So they also included Western style illustrations in the magazine. So I think that was a very major shifting point or turning point for Japanese children's literature. And mostly many Japanese authors like, who are not actually known as authors of children's literature, even they contributed stories. For example, there is a Japanese author named Ryunosuke Akutagawa. He is very well known for his short story Rashomon, and this Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, he has made a film on. In fact, it's two of its stories, Rashomon and in a Bamboo Grove. So Akutagawa is not actually a children's, writer of children's literature. He's supposed to be a father of Japanese short story, but even he wrote children's stories for this magazine, Akai Tori. There is a very famous children's story called The Spider's Thread. And another one is, it's based on a Chinese story, Tu Se Chun. So like this. So I guess that is the significance of the magazine Akai Tori. That even the mainstream writers specially contributed children's stories for that magazine.
We have a project coming on Akutagawa, where Sabir Ali, a student of Japanese literature in Vishwabharati Shantiniketan, he did translate some of his stories, but it is not for meant for children. It is mainly for general reading, and I know Akutagawa's stories are very deep and it is much layered. It's not easy to
Yes.
So yes, it's very interesting and wonderful as well that he wrote for children as well, because his writing is completely different in that sense.
Yes.
I have few questions from audience. First one is,
just a second.
Shorno's voice is very faint.
Shoham, just a second. Just let me finish these questions first, and then we
will your voice is very faint. That is someone audience that I want to know, inform you.
Okay. Am I audible right now? Am I audible?
Yeah, it's much better.
Am I audible clearly? Shoham, am I audible clearly?
Yes.
Okay, I think I can merge the next two questions together because they address the same thing. He asked the impact of Second World War on Japanese children's literature and how the development of manga has impacted children's literature, because it started after the what we can say uprootment or the cessation of connection with tradition via Second World War, because the manga is very different from Japanese Otogi's Osi, the fairy tales, and the perception is very different, the philosophy is very different in that case. So how Japanese children's literature changed in contemporary time, so that's what he wants to know.
Okay, I mean, I don't have much idea about Japanese children's literature, as I said, but one thing is, after the war, because there was so much of destruction and devastation, so it really took some time for Japanese children's literature to come up again, because writers were, hesitant to take up topics such as death and destruction and how to write stories for children. So like maybe like in 1950s, late 50s, the Japanese children's literature again started emerging after the war. And in 1960 there were three outstanding works. One is Akage no Pochi. That's a red-haired puppy Pochi. The author's name is Yamanaka Hisashi. Then another well-known author is Matsutani Miyoko. Her work is Tatsunoko Taro. That is Taro the Dragon Boy. And another one, the author is Yoshitomo Imae. His work is Yamano Mukoba Aoyumi Datta. That is Beyond the Mountains. There was the Blue Sea. So especially this work, Beyond the Mountain, there is Blue Sea, where there is a group of boys who are who have troubled childhoods, and they're living in very harsh surroundings, and then they come together and they go in, they board a raft and they go on a sea voyage. So that is how that's the content of the book. So initially you find that there was a kind of a idealist thought in post-war Japanese children's literature that human beings ought to grow and the world should be changed for better, or children can overcome any problems they face, and their circumstances would definitely improve. But later on, it moved more towards realism, I think. And if you see some recent trends, like after 2000 in Japanese children's literature, one is many Japanese children's authors, they are now collaborating with foreign authors of Japanese children's literature, or publishers, and they are even publishing their books overseas, and which are now imported back into Japan. So that is one important trend after 2000. Especially there was a children's book fair in Italy, Bologna. I don't recall exactly the year, but from there this trend started. Then there was also a project. It's called in Japanese Nichukan Heiwa Ehon. That is picture books for peace from Japan, China, and Korea. So it was a cooperative project between publishers of children's literature from China, Japan, and Korea, and the books which they published children's books which promoted peace and understanding between these three countries. As you know that China and Japan, they have memories of Japanese atrocities in Second World War. So this book project tried to promote peace and understanding between these three countries, and the books were published in all these three languages: Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. So this is one trend, you can say. Then another very recent thing is in 2011 there was this earthquake, East Japan earthquake, and the Fukushima, the Fukushima earthquake, and the Fukushima nuclear reactor disaster. So after that, again, the Japanese children's writers, now they are like sort of, they were faced with issues such as how to heal the children that are affected by these this disaster, and how you are supposed to offer them hope or cheer them up, and what kind of stories we should write and promote. So yeah, that is another thing. And I don't know, now maybe after this COVID pandemic, there would be a new challenge for
Sure.
Japanese children's authors.
No, I think
So it will be
worldwide
very
it's going.
interesting to see. Yeah.
Worldwide
And
it is
manga,
going.
yeah, the manga part, yes, manga has definitely influenced Japanese children's literature a lot. In fact, I would say that manga or the children's manga can be considered a part of Japanese children's literature, because in manga there are so many different genres in Japan. So there are like manga like for adults, for young adults, for children. So even for children, there are specific manga for young boys and young
Yes,
girls.
yes.
Like in Japanese, the words like shonen. Shonen is a young boy, and shojo is a young girl. So there are like shonen manga and shoujo manga. So some of the children's manga, they have become so popular, like they have become household names even in foreign countries. For example, Doraemon.
Yeah, yeah.
Doraemon is so famous, or Dragon Ball or Naruto, and many such Japanese children's mangas. So I would say they are a part of Japanese children's literature.
So I'm interested in something that is, earlier it was less pronounced. The gender division. Gender division was less pronounced in Japanese literature, but is it being more promoted in current situation in case of Japan? Because it, 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 as you
The
say that
gender division in children's
yes.
literature. Um, I won't say it is being promoted, but it's basically the manga, the writers of manga, they choose their audience, so they write for specific audience. So like this, if they write a manga, a particular manga, they know that this is going to be read by young boys, or this is going to be read by young girls, and accordingly their topics and their themes are different. So for example, if you see um, manga directed towards young boys, then you will see themes such as science fiction, or adventures, and or if you see the manga which are directed towards young girls, so you would see themes such as friendships between girls and their bonding, and of course like their meeting with boys and romances and all that. So depending on the target audience, the themes in Japanese children's manga, they or manga for young adults, um, they change.
Oh, oh. Sir, one thing that we cannot, but we have to conclude, that is Murakami's popularity. Murakami has written one book, The Strange Liberty, which is very popular among children. But how would you uh, rather rate Murakami's literary merit?
Actually, frankly speaking, honestly speaking, I haven't read much of Murakami. I've just read a few of his short stories, but I haven't really read his novels like Norwegian Wood, or Sputnik Sweetheart. And one thing I would say is Murakami's writing style is very simple. So I mean, his writing style is not difficult. Like if you compare some very well-known Japanese authors, such as Yasunari Kawabata, the first Nobel laureate of Japan, or Yukio Mishima, who is again very internationally famous, or Junichiro Tanizaki. So their writing styles are very difficult. And another thing, I think Murakami's writings are very international. Like you won't find uh,
Japanese culture
a very
sensibility.
Japanese element in them. Like anybody can read them, and anybody can relate to them. And of course, his most of the plots of his works are very surrealistic. So maybe I think that is one of the reasons for his popularity, that even somebody who is not very well versed with Japanese culture or Japanese history, he or she can still relate to Murakami's works, or appreciate and enjoy his works. That is not the case in case of many Japanese writers that like if you start reading some novel by Kawabata or Mishima, or so unless and until you are like well versed with Japanese culture, you won't really understand, or you won't really relate to most of their plots or themes or what they have to say. That is not the case with Murakami. So I think so his his un-Japaneseness, that is, I think that is what universal appeal. That's why he's so popular all over the world. Yeah.
And sir, he asks for your recommendation in case of Japanese children's literature. So if you have any-
Okay. Okay. I know only a few names. Yeah, one is of course Nimi Nankichi. Then another one is Kenji Miyazawa. He was a contemporary of Nimi Nankichi. He was, I think, born in 1896 and passed away in 1933, I think. So Kenji Miyazawa is again very famous as a writer of children's literature, and he wrote both stories and poems. One of his very famous poem is "Not to be defeated by rain." In Japanese, it is "Amenimo Makezu," and it's a very famous poem. And most of his stories again deal with nature and uh, uh, humans and human beings and their environment, and mm, and he also advocates the concept of living in harmony with nature and animals. Um, then some other names are Ogawa Mimei. Ogawa Mimei. Then a more recent one would be Tanikawa Shuntaro. And mm, then Momoko Ishii. Momoko Ishii is another one, and Masamoto Nasu. These are some of the well-known children's authors of children's literature in Japan.
Thank you, sir. His questions end here, and I will request Shohom to read any question if there are in our the questions are in our page.
There are a few questions. First one from Shujani Koya. Is this suitable for a 13-year-old?
Okay, it is about if this is our particularly about our book, then yes, it is suitable for a 13 years old, but it is more suitable if the child is younger. But a 13-year can definitely read it if he enjoys, if he has sensibilities, he can definitely read it. There is no problem in that.
Children literature doesn't have any age. Even I read.
Yeah, I enjoy completely reading. Shumon just texted me yesterday that I gobbled it up from start to end in within few hours, and so and so. So you can read it definitely.
Second one from there was Arshad Subhash. For you, what is more
Yes.
satisfying to translate? Children's literature or grown-up and deeper literature or sci-fi or more real factual historical literature?
Okay. What is satisfying for me to translate?
Children's
Um,
literature,
This
Science
or
fiction.
other
science
deeper
fiction.
literature or sci-fi or historical any other literature.
I would say translating, mysteries or horror stories, that would be most satisfying for me. Yeah, I mean, of course, I've also translated so-called the mainstream literature like Akutagawa's stories. And yes, I also enjoy translating science fiction stories. In fact, one of two of my first no, like my first translation, published translation, was a collection of short stories by Shinichi Hoshi. He's one of the very well-known writers of science fiction in Japan. So I would say, rather than uh, d- depending on the it's based on the author, actually, I mean, I might like to translate a particular author who is writing science fiction, or a particular author who is writing horror stories, or mystery stories, rather than a particular genre of literature.
It's quite understandable, sir. It depends on personal tastes and sensibilities as well. Some science fictions are more interesting than many so-called adult literature, not adult, serious literature. So it depends on the writing. Yes.
And there's a comment from Dipankar Gangopadhyay. He
Yes.
said, I'm sorry, was thinking of Kenki M when I read about this. A great effort. Thank you, everyone, especially Professor Bedekar.
Thank you, Dipankarda.
Next one from Kaushik Das. He said, keeping in mind that the Japanese society is a patriarchal one,
Hmm.
probably in the context of some discussion
Okay.
earlier.
Okay, he may be focusing on the issue of a patriarchal society, and how Japanese children's literature is affected by those sentiments. So he may wants to consider that aspect.
There's no more question till now. That was question. That was this question. Not there.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Shoham. So, sir, I was wondering if you would like to read a small story from the book, if you have the file. So, do you have the file with you?
Let me check. Let me check. Um,
And meanwhile, Shoham, can you please bring me a book from the table? Just check those page numbers.
Now, unfortunately, I don't have the file here saved on my laptop. I don't have it here.
Okay, okay.
Maybe you can read the
Yeah,
stories, or somebody else can read.
yeah, sure, sure, sure. I'm doing that. Shoham, if so I am reading my favorite one, that is One Fire. And before that, I may just reveal the book cover again, because this is anyway book release program. So this is the cover. This is the cover, and this is how the book looks. And I'll be reading.
A little bit closer. It's not visible properly.
Okay, this is the cover. This is the cover, and this is the book. So thank you very much to you all for showing such an amazing interest in our book, and I'm really overwhelmed. Your participation and your encouragement means a lot to all of us, and we are really, really blessed to have you all in by our side, in our support. Thank you, thank you. So I'll be reading One Fire from this book, which is my favorite. And why it is my favorite? Because you uh, you can't see the usual development of a story, but it takes you from a it connects a small thing and or locates the small incident into a larger perspective. So I'm going to read it. When I was a child, my home was in a small village at the foot of a mountain. We used to sell paper lanterns and candles. One evening, a cowherd brought a paper lantern and a candle from our home. Sorry to bother you, a little one, but please light my candle, the cowherd said to me. I had never struck a matchstick till then. So I had a matchstick gingerly at one end and scratched. A bluish fire lit up at the tip of the matchstick. I lighted the candle with that fire. Thank you, my boy, the cowherd said, and suspended the light paper lantern by the cow's flank, went on his way. Once I was alone, I thought about the fire that I had lit. How long will it go? That cowherd is from the other side of the mountain, so that fire will also cross the mountain. Perhaps in the mountains that cowherd may cross the path with a traveler who is going to another village. Then that traveler might say, "Excuse me, but may I borrow some of that fire?" And borrowing the fire from the cowherd may light his own paper lantern. Then the traveler would go walking along the mountain path all night. In that case, the traveler may come across a lot of people with drums and bells. They may say, "One boy from our village has been bewitched by a fox and has not returned to the village. So we are looking for him. Extremely sorry, but please let us borrow the fire of your own paper lantern." And borrowing the fire from the traveler, they would lit all the lanterns that they have. They will light up along the long lanterns and round lanterns. And then they would go off on their search, looking in the mountains and valleys, beating their drums and ringing their bells. I think that the fire which I used to lit up in the cowherd's paper lantern will be passed on from one place to the next, and is still lit up somewhere. I particularly like this story very much. There is no story as such in Western perspective, but locating a small fire and connecting it to a larger perspective, it is amazing for me. And the way imagination flows from a little matchstick to a search party and then flowing along is absolutely brilliant. So it is mainly for little children, and such stories are there. Some conventional Western that are more suitable for Western perspective, those kind of stories are there as well. So please go through the book, and these are small stories, small imagination, figments of imagination. I absolutely enjoyed doing this book, so I hope if you get copies, so you too will be enjoying this book. I'm quite sure about it. So I believe we may end our session by now. Thank you, sir.
I have
Thank
two
you.
more comments. I
Okay.
just want to
Okay,
read these messages.
yes.
First one from Harshad Vijay Farke, very interesting session. Thanks. Second one from Kaushik Das, indeed a nice discussion as we have come to know much about the Japanese literature. Again from Harshad Vijay Farke, amazing story and nice message.
Thank you. Thank
That's
you.
all.
Yes. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It was amazing to have a little conversation with you. We hope we will get back to you again with the part 2 of
Sure.
this book, and we will have Gone the Fox and the Camellia Tree. Those are hugely popular stories, and many not clip, many short movies and many story what you illustrated storybooks are made based on them. So we'll be coming up with another part, and this part will be available in Amazon from today onward. And actually I'll be updating data now, and you may start buying if you please after 12 o'clock, that is tomorrow. Today is Wednesday, maybe Thursday. After 12 o'clock they will be updating the entire server, so it will be available in Amazon pretty soon. Thank you very much. So I think we may end the session here. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Welcome.